Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for October 4th, 2012. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Today we have a small crew, but a good one. Joining us today is Jim Clausing, and I am John Hogoboom. And we're going to jump right into a topic that's been pretty popular in the past few weeks here regarding distributed denial of service attacks. And our first story, which I'll cover, is that Threat Post reported an article a few days ago regarding the It's Okay, No Problem Bro automated toolkit. And this is a toolkit that's been used in the recent financial distributed denial of service attacks. It's not the only one, but it's one of the more, I guess I would say, successful or aggressive ones that was participating in that attack. And you can refer to this article and read up on it, but basically what this toolkit is a script that gets dropped on vulnerable web servers, and then an attacker can use that web server to start sending a lot of denial of service traffic. So what I would say is if you're a user or someone who has a web server, notably a lot of the web servers that have been compromised are kind of these small, little web servers, personal type web servers, not big ones for big companies, but these kind of web hosting sites and whatnot. If you have a web server like that, one thing I would say is go look at your PHP files and your document routes and make sure nothing's changed if you're not expecting anything to have been changed in the past couple of months or so on there. If it has, you might have had one of these the It's Okay, No Problem Bro toolkit dropped on there. So I wanted to mention that. I don't know. Have you have any insight into this, Jim?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to agree with you. It's something that folks who host small, their small business websites or whatever in these hosted environments. We've talked about it on a number of occasions about whose responsibility is it to whether you're just buying the website and it's the hoster's responsibility to secure everything, or whether you're also personally responsible for securing the OS and everything. But regardless of that, you need to be keeping track of watching things that are changing on your website. You need to get daily reports of files that have changed and actually pay attention to that. If you're not expecting things to change and things are changing, if you didn't do it, you need to be talking to your hosting provider to see if it's something they did, because these are relatively easy targets for the bad guys if you don't have a dedicated team paying attention to securing it. And this is October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we'll be mentioning that on and off probably for the next couple of weeks. And so one of the things that's near and dear to my heart is, making sure that owners of these websites that they're having hosted elsewhere keep in mind they need to keep on top of what's going on with their web server.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's a lot of people, I even know some people that they set up even maybe a website at one point, and it just runs and it stays up there, and they don't really do much with it, or it's just kind of been abandoned over the years, a lot of these small ones. But they're on these very powerful web hosting server farms. And those servers that they're hosted on, they'll host multiple websites, but they have lots of power. They're very high-power machines because they host thousands of websites on them on one machine. And they also have lots and lots of bandwidth. So when they get turned into an attacker via a vulnerability like this, they can contribute a lot to a denial of service attack. So it's important that you and everybody else who's on these multiple hosting, shared web hosting type arrangements, you all keep track of what's going on there. And hopefully your hosting provider will help with that as well. But as we've seen in some cases, they don't know everything either, but they're pretty quick to react to it when you do notify them about it.
Right. Yeah, I've been involved in help setting up websites for some local nonprofits, and it's exactly as you described. They get the content up there, and then they kind of forget about it. And so it's something that we probably need to take advantage of this awareness opportunity to remind people to keep track of their websites.
Right. And on that note, talking about awareness and things that, this is the flip side of the coin. So if you are on the receiving end of a distributed denial of service attack, here's some things. This is kind of a quick checklist, so I'm not going to go through all of these bullet items, but some things that you'll probably want to pay attention to, or things you want to consider when you're looking to kind of in advance protect yourself from a DDoS type event that you might be expecting, or even if you're not, it's good to have some kind of action plan together. So one of the first things that's important, I always say, is to profile normal activity. And we see lots of times where I've seen other companies or customers, they'll all of a sudden come to me saying, oh, we're being attacked. But the thing is they never looked at what their normal traffic is, and they're probably getting attacked all the time, either by script kiddies, and I'm not talking about denial of service attacks, but just other things. So what's really good to know is know what's normal in terms of your regular traffic they might be seeing on your website, your DNS servers, things like that. And then look for reconnaissance-type activities just to even get a baseline of that type of stuff. The next thing would be to minimize your attack profile. And there's a lot of items on here. A few of the ones that I particularly talk to customers about is to consider segmenting your network. So if you're a company and you have, maybe a lot of users that are what I would call your enterprise user, your employees, and they need to get out to the internet to do just regular work, segment them from what you might have as your customer-facing website. So like, let's say Google. I'm sure Google has their web server farms in one place segmented off, or maybe they're too big of an example, but their employees are going through a different access route. So if somebody attacks their website, the employees themselves are not affected by that. That's a big one. Also separate your various services, such as mail, web, DNS. Try to keep them on separate things. Don't try to put them all together on one thing. Sometimes it's hard to do if you're if you're a small company, but if you can, try to segment the various services that you have. And know your environment. So if you do have DDoS service already, try to test it at least once annually if you can. Know your choke points. Know how to detect and measure the effects of attack. That goes back to getting an initial normal profile of what's normal. These are a couple of things that I would look into if you are trying to mitigate a denial of service attack. And plan your countermeasures. Know how to react. Know the people that you're going to need to get involved when an attack occurs, and make sure you have contact information for them so you can all get together, have some kind of action plan. Maybe you're going to all meet on a conference bridge or some other type of thing. Make sure that conference bridge is not going to be adversely impacted by a denial of service attack as well. So consider that if some kind of attack is occurring against your network, whatever you're going to use to coordinate your team to deal with that attack, that it's not going to be affected by the denial of service attack that might be occurring.
Yeah, those are a couple of really big ones. You are unlikely to be able to fend off a denial of service attack entirely by yourself. You're going to need help from your upstream, service providers, and having an out-of-band communication method. You can't set up a VoIP conference bridge if your VoIP server is on the same segment that's being DOSed. So.
All good things to consider. And sometimes, especially if you haven't experienced an attack before, you haven't thought about all of those kinds of things that these eventualities that you might run into that were unexpected. We've seen lots of these over the years that we're like, well, next time we'll remember that that's something to think about.
And the profiling in peacetime, what's normal traffic. The other the other side of that we've seen a number of entities, customers, and others over the years who don't realize how close they're getting to capacity, and then they introduce a new product or something, and all of a sudden their website gets a spike in traffic that they weren't ready for, and they think they're under attack when they kind of did it to themselves. So it's not entirely just to be aware of attack traffic trying to hide in there, but to understand capacity issues and how close you're getting, so that when is it time to add more bandwidth, more servers, that kind of thing, before you accidentally DOS yourself.
Right. So yeah, it's a good point. And then lastly, just rounding out here, act intelligently and systematically. If you're trying to take countermeasures and they don't seem to be having an effect in helping you, maybe turn that off, because you don't want to do too many things at once. You want to do something and then see if it actually, had the effect that you want to do. If you start doing a whole bunch of things to mitigate an attack, you might not know which one it was that actually, contributed to solving it. It might not have been all of them, all those steps. And then make sure, again, back to Jim's point, make sure if you have good relationship with your partners, if you have a DDoS service provider and your ISP, that you have contacts with them, so that when something does happen, you'll be able to reach out and get their assistance as well.
Yeah, if your pipes are getting flooded to capacity, your end of the pipe is not the end you want to do your mitigation at. So that's why you need to be in contact with upstream providers to help when you get some of these really big attacks.
Right. And like we said, the It's Okay No Problem Bro toolkit can generate some really big attacks because they're on really high bandwidth, high power machines. So that's why some of these attacks that have been occurring in the previous couple of weeks have gotten a little bit more press than usual. Like we said last week, not the biggest attacks we've ever seen, but they're bigger than usual. And I think that's a contributing factor in the fact that they have pretty high power machines there with lots of bandwidth that they're working from. Moving along, Jim, you have some news on the secure hash algorithm. So what's going on there?
Yes, and we talk about these hashing algorithms from time to time, MD5 and SHA-1, and you've noted over the years that there have been attacks against these algorithms, and so MD5 and SHA-1 are both considered broken. And so NIST, the National Institutes of, I don't remember what it stands for off the top of my head now, but the U.S. government agency that's responsible for establishing these standards for governments, and it applies to banking and stuff like that too, started a competition last year to select a successor to SHA-1, SHA-2, and National Institute of Standards and Technology. I knew I'd get it, thanks to our producer for reminding me. But NIST started the competition last year to find the next generation of secure hash algorithm because SHA-1 and MD5 had significant vulnerabilities, significant issues, basically by themselves shouldn't be relied on for things like digital signatures anymore. Now, the 512-byte version of SHA, sometimes called SHA-512, is for the moment still reasonably safe, and in fact, Bruce Schneier was suggesting that they should abandon the SHA-3 competition and just recommend SHA-512 for the moment, but NIST had already gone well down the path. So yesterday, NIST announced the winner of this competition, and the winning algorithm, one of 64 that was originally submitted and that had been whittled down is called Keccak, I believe is how it's pronounced. And it's some of the design decisions or criteria were that it had to be implementable with reasonable efficiency in hardware, had to be relatively quick. So Keccak is going to be SHA-3, Secure Hash Algorithm 3, the next NIST standard. It will be folded into one of the FIPS standards, and it will be the required hashing algorithm of the U.S. federal government going forward, probably not until next year or sometime thereafter. But so expect to see SHA-3, the new algorithm, showing up. It'll be the one that probably to use going forward because this hopefully will survive the coming attacks for a few years anyway.
All right. So I'll admit a little naivety here, but so the reason that they want to replace this algorithm is because a lot of passwords and or keys are encoded with SHA algorithms, and it's too easy to brute force or something? Is that why they're looking to do that?
Now, both MD5 and SHA-1 have proven to be vulnerable to attacks where you can generate chosen plain text and generate hash collisions too easily. You're going to have collisions with any hash algorithm because you're taking a large space and generating a smaller signature for that space. So by definition, you have to have the collisions. There are going to be multiple 2 gig files that hash to the same 512 byte hash or whatever. But the issue becomes if it becomes easy to select the collisions or vulnerable to some other cryptographic attacks. MD5 and SHA-1 both have been shown in the last few years to be vulnerable to some of these attacks. There are still certain applications where it's probably not unreasonable to count on them, though. But digital signatures probably are not one of those, since you want the non-repudiation. So that was part of, because of the attacks against MD5 and SHA-1, they wanted to move on. SHA-1 was 128-bit. They extended that to 256 and 512, and those haven't shown to be vulnerable in the same way yet, in any sort of feasible amount of time anyway. But that was their motivation for wanting a new hash algorithm, is these previous ones had been shown to be vulnerable to cryptographic attacks. So there will undoubtedly be cryptographic attacks that eventually succeed against this one too, but it's a question of how much time until that happens. How long are these digital signatures good for? How long before you have to start worrying that they were forged, or
Right. And I guess with this, maybe they're trying to get a little bit ahead of the game with the SHA-2 stuff. So if people get moved to SHA-3, which will be more complex, it'll be less likely that the eventually SHA-2 will fall or something like that, and they're trying to just get ahead of the game.
Right. It will eventually fall, and that's one of the things. Over time, they'll all fall.
Yeah.
But so absolutely, one of the reasons for continuing with this was to try to get ahead of the game. Like I said, Bruce Schneier, who's one of the most famous guys in crypto, that wrote the seminal textbook on the subject, was arguing SHA-512 is probably good enough for a while, but so those are SHA-512 and the new SHA-3 are probably both reasonable for for the foreseeable future. And SHA-512 we already have implementations for, where the SHA-3 isn't out. We haven't seen those widely integrated into the existing tools or anything yet. So that will be coming, though, now that NIST has selected it as the next NIST standard. So we'll be seeing implementations of it.
Okay, great. All right, thanks for that. And so now we'll move on to the Internet Weather Report. We don't have a really big report, but we'll cover some things that have been occurring over the past week or so here. So we had talked about, we've talked extensively about the security system, DVRbotnet, I think we're calling it. It's basically a botnet composed primarily of security cameras, these multi-camera systems that people use for security systems. And we're seeing some increase on, we had kind of a baseline flow here of normal kind of traffic. Over the past week or so here, we've seen some more aggressive activity on 210 TCP, which happens to be the command and control that this botnet uses. It's a peer-to-peer kind of tiered kind of command and control. Not sure what this means. Probably means there's some more activity going. It might be doing more instructions or something of that nature. I don't know that it's relative of the size of the botnet or indicating that it's growing in any way, but there's definitely some more activity going on with it. So that's interesting. Primarily sources are in China and U.S., which is kind of what we've seen before, I think. So in any event, that's one that we keep mentioning and you should keep an eye out for. If you see inbound scanning on that, or if you have security camera DVRs, you should check to see if you're seeing any 210 TCP traffic to it, because that is not normal. That is not a registered port it should be using. The next one, we've also seen a little bump up in traffic here on telnet scanning. Kind of has a pretty regular baseline. This is scanned quite a bit because, this is another means for remote access into devices. One thing about these spikes, I took a closer look at the larger ones we've had over the past few days here. Most of the sources are U.S., India, China, Taiwan. They are pretty geographically dispersed. One thing I did notice in particular is that I'm almost positive they are Linux devices that are doing this scanning. When we look at their ephemeral ports, and if you're not familiar with that term, but basically when your computer makes a connection to another computer, it'll usually connect. We usually talk about destination ports. So the destination port is 23, but your computer needs a source port on its side, and these are usually assigned somewhat, they're assigned by your operating system, and Linux uses these ranges, 32.768 through 61,000. We can see from our scan source data that that's the kind of source port being assigned to these scanners, so I'm pretty sure they're Linux devices, and that kind of makes sense. Linux devices usually run telnet, or it could be embedded Linux devices like your little home routers and whatnot. They'll use the same ephemeral port ranges. So that kind of makes sense here, that they're not Windows-type machines. And another slide that we have here, and we might try to show this on a regular basis, but we've talked about ZeroAccess before, and I want to correct something that I said maybe a few weeks ago. I misread a report that said ZeroAccess is at 9 million infections. It's actually not. It's really around 1 million. And it has had 9 million installations of it, only 1 million active bots in the network. And I think I'm trying to remember who that was reported by, but I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look at the report. In any event, this is a picture showing some of the peer-to-peer traffic that we see relative to ZeroAccess. Kind of started up around the middle of April, and it's ramped up considerably over that time span. It had a little bit of a dip here, which I don't really have any account for, although this might be something that we should keep an eye on over the next few months or so and see how it's trending. These numbers that you see here are not really indicative of how many bots there are in the network. It's more, we do scan tips per hour. We also don't see the entire internet, obviously. So we're seeing roughly around 27 to 30,000 bots per hour. Don't really have a correlation of that, but some other AV vendors are pretty sure it's around 1 million of real ones out there across the entire internet space. So we'll kind of trend and see how this goes over time. Well, my hope is that this goes down, and I keep telling people, look for activity in your network. If you're a company and you have a firewall and you're blocking outbound UDP, which a lot of people are, unless it's maybe DNS or something, look for a lot of drop packets on these ports, 16464, 16465, 16470, and 16471. If you see that in your firewall, probably the source is a zero-access infection that you have inside your company. Go look for it. Try to clean it up. It can be difficult to clean up, but at least try. We talked about that at length, actually, how difficult zero-access can be to clean up. And moving right along to the end of the show here, the top most probed ports. No new stories here, really, in terms of what we're seeing. This is what we see every week in, week out, pretty much. 445 TCP is your configure type stuff or other bots that are searching for that vulnerability on 445 that a lot of, that configure was famous for compromise or using as part of its infection vector. And 14, as I said, 16464, 471, 470, and 465 up here are all zero access. So it's so big that it pushes the profile way up on what we see in terms of scan traffic. So like I said, there are a lot of infections out there. Try to get your zero access infections cleaned up. Otherwise, remote desktop protocol we see all the time, 3389 TCP. 1433 TCP, Microsoft SQL Server, 23 TCP telnet, which we talked about. We saw some more aggressive scanning of that recently from some of those Linux-based devices. 22 TCP, which is SSH. That's just kind of a more secure form of telnet. That's also scanned quite a bit. And then everything else falls into the other category, which that pie has gotten a little smaller than usual, although it looks like it might have gotten bigger than it was previous weeks, and I'm not sure if that's related to that security system DVR botnet that scans aggressively. I didn't get a chance to look at that chart, but we'll try to bring one up on that next week. It has been quiet for most of September, but I haven't checked this past week to see what kind of ports they're scanning on recently, if any. And then in terms of what's being scanned by the most number of sources, this is the most number of unique sources scanning particular ports. 445 TCP is always the big guy. And this is a little bit of departure from previous weeks, I think. 23 TCP is, well, I should mention, ICMP ping here is really not security relevant. But the 23 TCP telnet is a larger wedge than usual. It's basically the top second spot here. And that's probably related to the that increased scanning that we showed on one of the earlier charts. Zero access here at the 1464. I think Jim might have highlighted 210 TCP. That's a pretty big wedge. Like we said, it's increased. That was why I pulled the chart up on that one. So there's a lot more activity there than we had seen recently. And this is relative to the number of unique sources. So we're seeing more of those sources engaged. Since it is a peer-to-peer type of command and control for this botnet, it's pretty hard to really get a good handle on the exact number of bots participating in the network, but we're definitely seeing more activity there.
The thing that stuns me about this one compared to previous weeks is how small the other slice is. The 445 has gotten, is always fairly large, and it's stayed large this time, and you mentioned 23 and 210 have gotten larger this week, but everything else is just so much smaller this week than usual.
Yeah, and I prepared these slides, so I might have to make sure I didn't make a mistake there, but I'm pretty sure I got this right. But it is noticeably smaller, and that might be an indication of the fact that there's not as much other ports being scanned as aggressively as these ones are, and that's basically what it should mean by unique sources. Again, the 16,000 range ones, zero access up at the top, and then we have RDP. And I always kind of mention about RDP, there are still Morto infections out there. Morto is a worm that uses RDP to propagate. At one point, I almost wanted to bring in some information on this for the show, but I set up a honeypot at home, and it got infected within about 15 minutes with Morto. So it's out there. It's being scanned a lot. If you leave a vulnerable RDP machine out there long enough, it'll get snared by Morto. Just got to put a very weak password on it, and it'll get picked up right away. And then lastly, 5900 TCP is VNC, which is akin to remote desktop protocol. It's just kind of more of a open source type of protocol used across Windows, Linux, and other types of platforms for interactive remote control of the desktop. And that's it. I don't know. Do you have any other insights there, Jim? Or
no, it's just something to keep an eye on. That other slice had gotten larger when there was lots of different ports being scanned on the previous one, and now all of a sudden it's smaller. So it's something we need to keep an eye on for the next few weeks to see what's really going on there.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So thank you, everybody. That's our show for today. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, I encourage you to email us. We'd love to hear from everybody about what they think of the show. You can email us at ThreatTraq@list.att.com. And this video program is also available at att.com/ThreatTraq and on YouTube. An audio version is also available from iTunes or FeedBurner. Just search for ThreatTraq. Thanks to Jim for participating. We got the skeleton crew here today, but I think we got a good show. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm John Hogoboom. We'll be back next week with another AT&T ThreatTraq. Until then, keep your network safe.